Hello everybody, this is a very brief update on another project that I am updating now. I'm making a new version of Cerberus 2080 that I released back in 2021, almost 2 years ago. It's a multiprocessor computer featuring a Z80 and a 65CO2 CPU, plus a I/O controller, which is basically an Atmega microcontroller, which is then the third microprocessor in the architecture. That's why Cerberus 3 heads. The original used only DIP or PLCC chips, so we could always have through-hole sockets, large chips. There was an advantage to that in the sense that people could easily assemble and build the machine themselves and sort of scavenge the chips. But in the meantime, two of the chips, the two dual-ported memories, which are large DIP48 ICs, they are no longer made. They have been taken out of production because of the IC crisis, the IC crunch. Microchip decided that package is now not worthwhile making. Some of the other chips, like the CPLDs, have become very difficult to find in PLCC packages as well. Another disadvantage of Cerberus is that the large through-hole packages and all the sockets made the system very expensive. It costs 350 euros to build that thing. So the Dutch Home Computer Museum still has the chips. They still have the dual-ported memories. We had a wafer made for them specifically for Cerberus. So if you want the large, old, very retro-looking version, you can still buy them from the Home Computer Museum. I'll put a link in the description. But going forward, I wanted to make a different version, and this is what you see right now. This is an SMD version, surface mount version of Cerberus. I call it Cerberus 2100, as you see here. It's the follow-up. This is much cheaper. What you see here are the two dual-ported memories, but now they are in a QFN package, fine pitch, well, not super fine pitch, but fairly fine pitch QFN packages, and they will be available in April or May of 2023, according to Mauser and DigiKey and all that. The whole thing is much cheaper. I'm aiming for a bill of materials at around 100 euros, or $100, or maybe slightly more, but not much more, maybe even less. I have to do the calculations, and that is already taking into account the current prices for these ICs, which are much higher than they used to be before the chip crisis. Until 3 years ago or so, everything was much cheaper. But still, this SMD version, Cerberus 2100, will be a lot cheaper. It's much smaller as well. If we go to the main PCB file and look at the PCB information, so it's about 19.4 centimeters times 11.7 centimeters. Yeah, 20 by 10 centimeters, something like this. So it's fairly small. If I go to view here and zoom to 100%, yeah, it's pretty small. I know, depending on the monitor you're watching it on, the size will be completely different, but it's pretty small. Now, a nice thing of this is that I was thinking, because Cerberus uses two CPUs, you see them here, and this is the W65CO2S, and this is the Z80 CPU. It uses two CPUs, and in order for the system architecture to be flexible enough to accommodate both CPUs, which have very different control signals, I use CAT, this Atmega microcontroller here. It's an Atmega 328P. I use CAT as the system master and as a DMA device, a direct memory access device. CAT is what reads the inputs from the microSD card that you see here. Also reads the keyboard. The keyboard connector is here. This is a PS2 connector, the standard PS2 connector. There are two lines coming from this. They go down here into CAT, and Cat is the one that distributes the tasks to the Z80 or to the 6502. It's the one that sends keyboard data to the CPUs via direct memory access. It basically puts the keystrokes in a part of memory. If I remember correctly, it's in a part of video memory that's not used for video. Or maybe not. I don't quite remember. Maybe it's in the low memory. It puts it in memory and tells the CPU to go fetch the code of the key pressed from whatever the address it is, where it places the keystrokes in system memory. So cat provides an abstraction layer between the CPUs and the rest of the system in order to make the system agnostic of the specifics of the CPU control signals. There is a layer of abstraction in between done by cat. And I was thinking, well, since Cerberus already has that and it's tested, many people have a Cerberus, the whole thing works. It runs BASIC for both CPUs. It has assemblers for both CPUs. It runs Forth for both CPUs. There's a bunch of programs already written for it. So we know that this layer of abstraction works. And I thought, well, there is an obvious advantage to it, which is we put some expansion slots on Cerberus 2100. And now, because of this layer of abstraction in between, the control signals of the bus, namely these signals here, expansion enable, expansion select, expansion bus request, expansion interrupt request, expansion write, expansion read. Oh, I forgot to put an X here. Oh darn, I have to change. This is not supposed to be a W, it's supposed to be an X. So it's XRD. I'll correct this later. Expansion bus acknowledgement and the expansion clock, which is the system clock going to the expansion cards. And then we have the 16 bits of the address bus and the 8 bits of the data bus. Now the point is, these control signals here, they are not CPU specific. Their language is the language of cat. And cat, via spacer, the chip in the middle here, the main logic chip, translates this language here into the language of the specific control signals of either CPU. So this allows users to just build expansion cards with their perf boards or breadboards or Arduino boards that they can connect here via jumper wires. And use those expansion cards that they build themselves with whatever CPU they want. So you have one system that allows you to plug expansion cards to communicate to either CPU, either of the two most popular CPUs. And it has another advantage. It allowed me to simplify the bus or the expansion bus protocol a lot. It's very simple. Now let me give you an overview of how these signals are supposed to be used both for read cycles and write cycles, whereby the expansion cards can either read from system memories. There are 4 memories here: video memory, character memory, high memory, and low memory. So an expansion card can read from either of the 4, or it can write via direct memory access to either of the 4 as well. And the protocol to do this, I'm going to explain to you now. Let's look first at the read cycle, when an expansion card is trying to read data from the system memory, data that has been placed there by the active CPU. So these are the signals that are relevant. The whole thing starts with all the signals inactive, all of them high. We are using reverse logic here, so when the signals are low, they are active. We start with all of them inactive. Now the CPU now goes and writes something to an area of memory, a certain address range that is meant to receive data for the expansion cards. So the CPU puts that data in memory, but the address where it does it is such that the data is meant for the expansion card. So the system will pulse the expansion select or XLC signal. Spacer does that, the logic in spacer does that, and that tells the expansion card that the CPU has put something in system memory that is meant for the expansion card. Now, the card doesn't need to reply immediately. A few cycles can go without any reaction to that. The data will still be in memory. But at some point, the card will try to read the data that is in memory, waiting for it. So it brings the expansion bus request signal, xBusRec, brings it low or active to tell cat, or the I/O controller, that it wants to access the buses. Now, cat will eventually respond to this by bringing down the expansion bus acknowledgement signal to tell the expansion card, okay, the buses are tri-stated, you can access the buses now, they are available for you. And again, the expansion card doesn't need to reply immediately, but at some point it will respond by bringing the expansion enable signal low, the XE. And what that does, it takes away the buffers that connect the expansion cards to the system, takes those buffers away from a high impedance state. So the card is now electrically connected to the system buses. The next step it does, it will put some address on the address bus. That's the address it wants to read from. Now the address takes a cycle to stabilize, that's why I use this little cross here. It's just meant to say that, okay, the address bus, the contents of the address bus are now changing. They take a little while to stabilize, one cycle. Once they are stable, the expansion card pulses the read strobe, in other words, brings it down for one cycle, and the system memory will respond to that by putting the contents of the given address on the data bus here. And those will also take a cycle to stabilize, but at this point here, at the end of that cycle, the data bus will contain the contents of the address where there is data waiting for the expansion card. That's the idea. After that's done, the expansion card can release the buses by pulling xBusRec high and the rest of the system, and also, of course, releasing the buses or disabling the expansion buffers by bringing expansion enable high or inactive. So this tells cat, I don't need to use the buses anymore, cat, so you can give them back to the CPU. And this signal here, this transition to high, tells the buffers that connect the expansion card to the system bus to tri-state themselves. So the expansion cards no longer interfere electrically with whatever is going on in the system buses. And of course, the bus acknowledge signal at some point, maybe not a cycle later, but at some point later, after busRec is released, bus acknowledge will respond, and therefore at this point here, if the expansion card wants to access the buses again, it needs to bring busRec down again at a later point, because for as long as this signal is high, the CPUs, well, the active CPU is using the system buses. So that's basically it. That's a read cycle from system memory, whereby an expansion card can read the data from system memory by as if it were a DMA device, a direct memory access device. Now let's look at the write cycle. The signals are similar. Instead of expansion read, now we have expansion write strobe, and instead of expansion select, we now have expansion IRQ, or interrupt request. I'll show you how this is supposed to work. So if the expansion card wants to write to system memory, first thing it does is to request the buses by bringing xBusRec low. It has to wait for cat to respond to this by bringing expansion bus acknowledgement low. So now at this point here, at this cycle, from this point on, the buses are available to the expansion card. That's what this means. Now, before, in the previous example for the read cycle, the first thing I did was to bring expansion enable low, but that's not the only way this works. You could also, before you enable the expansion, the card could put the address and the data, oops, sorry about that, and the data on its local bus before it actually enables the buffers. And once those two values have stabilized inside the card itself, then it enables the expansion. I said enable the buses, but what I meant is enable the expansions. So now the expansion is enabled, and there is a address value and there is a data value on the buses coming from the expansion card. Once these values are it's stabilized, the expansion card hits the right strobe. Oh, this animation is very sensitive. It hits the right strobe, it pulses the right strobe, and that means that the memory would take the byte of data on the data bus and store it on the specified address as per the address bus. So at this point here, at the end of the right strobe, when the right strobe is inactive, the data will have been committed to memory already. So we can release the buses by making xBusRec high, because we already wrote at this point here, the data is written to memory. So we just release the buses here, and cat will acknowledge that by bringing bus acknowledgement high or inactive. And this is optional at this point. You don't need to do that, but it's very handy in certain cases. You can pose the interrupt request, the XIRQ signal. The card can pose that signal, make it low for a cycle, to tell the active CPU, hey, I've put something in system memory for you. There is data there waiting for you. Go there and have a look. So this is how the CPU can interpret this IRQ or this interrupt request. Of course, what it will actually do depends on how you program the interrupt management routine on the CPU. But I wanted to make sure that there is a way for the expansion card to tell the active CPU that it has already put data in memory for it. The equivalent to this on the read cycle, as we've seen before, is the expansion select. That's how the CPU lets the expansion card know that the CPU, has put something in memory for the expansion card. And the other way around is XIRQ, this signal here, where the expansion card lets the CPU know that it put data in memory for the CPU. Very simple. It's a very generic protocol because CAT, the I/O controller, which is also a DMA device, is the one that interprets all these signals here. These signals are not directly interpreted by the active CPU at all. It's CAT that interprets them and then translates these signals to the signals that the CPU understands. Because of this extra layer of indirection through CAT, through the I/O controller, this protocol here is CPU agnostic. It will work for the Z80 or for the 65CO2. And that's the advantage. So you basically have in Cerberus 2100 a kind of, what was that called, RP 2014? RP or whatever, this little Z80 computer that people can build their own expansion cards for, but that's only with the Z80. With this protocol, we can do something like that, but also for the 6502 and many other features and higher clock speed and all those goodies. Okay, now the little buffers that I was alluding to that connect the expansion cards to the main system to the right are these buffers here. Mainly these three here, I call it BT, I forgot what it was about, buffer, whatever. Buffer 1, buffer 2, buffer 3. They can be enabled or disabled. When they are disabled, they tri-state and they isolate the expansion cards from the system. When they are enabled, they basically glue the system buses to the signals here that go to the expansion cards or come from the expansion cards. There are three resistor banks here that you see here. They are basically pull-ups for the address bus and the data bus, 2 for the address bus because it's 16 bits, 1 for the data bus, which is 8 bits. There are pull-ups in the form of discrete resistors that you see here. All these little resistors here are pull-ups for all the other signals, including the address and the data buses, but on the side of the expansion. These pull-ups here through the resistor banks, they are pull-ups for the system side of what's going on. Of course, both need to be pulled up in this case, because the buffers can isolate one from the other, and the buffers are in between anyway, so you want to pull up both sides to make things safer and easier to use. What else can I tell you? The rest is pretty much like the original Cerberus 2080. There are two oscillators, 25.175 megahertz for the video circuitry, which is here on top. This is what produces the VGA signal that goes out to the VGA monitor via this VGA connector here. This is part of the digital to analog, the DAC that takes digital signals and makes of them analog signals to drive the monitor. In the case of Cerberus, there was only one color, white on black and white. But in the case of Cerberus 2100, I decided to keep the three channels RGB. Instead of merging them together, I kept them separate, and I put a little potentiometer for each one of them, separate from the others, so you can adjust the intensity of red, green, and blue. So you still have only one color on top of black in the background, but that color can be whatever you want it to be. You can make it amber, you can make it green, you can make it blue, red, anything in between, because you can adjust it with analog potentiometers, so they can be in practice anything. That one color can be in practice anything you want. So that's also a change with respect to the Cerberus 2080. These are the two dual-ported memories that we had before, but now instead of DIP48, we have a surface mount package here. Spacer is the same as before. Well, it has more signals to deal with now because of these control signals here that come from the bus expansion. So this package has more pins, but the logic resources are the same as before. I'm using more of it. This is Cavia, which in Cerberus 2080 was a smaller package. I think it was a PLCC 44 and Skunk was a PLCC 48. Now they are both QFN 100. It doesn't mean that Cavia got bigger. The logic resources inside are the same as before. I am just using a package with more pins, which I'm also not taking advantage of. The reason I'm using this larger package is because the prediction is at Mauser and DigiKey that the CPLD in this package will become available sooner, will become available in April or May. Yeah, the package is a QFP package actually. So that's why, and it has the extra aesthetical advantage that it looks symmetrical with Skunk. Cavia and Skunk look the same now, even though in terms of logic resources, the number of flip-flops inside Cavia is smaller. These are the two CPUs. This is CAT, the Atmega controller. There are two extra buffers here, which have to do with mainly clock management, just like before, and two system memories. Each one is 32 kilobytes, so physically you have 64 kilobytes, but only 60 kilobytes are used, because the remaining 4 kilobytes are addressed to the video memory, video memory 2 kilobytes, and the character memory 2 kilobytes. We still have these little JTAG connectors here to program the three CPLDs, Cavia, Skunk, and Spacer. Of course, I could have JTAG chained them and have only one connector instead of three. The reason I didn't do that is, number one, the connector, I chose another one now than I had chosen for Cerberus, and this one costs only a few cents, so very little change in cost. In terms of routing, it's much easier to have three connectors locally connected to their respective chip instead of having to daisy chain them together, and we would have a long routing of, two global signals. So I didn't like that. And for the normal user, it can be confusing as well, because you have, when you are going to program several chips via JTAG, and when they are daisy chained together, in the software side of things, you have to make sure that you know how to do that. So I thought, nah, I'll leave it out. I'll put one connector for each, and then it's very clear. You only need to load one configuration file, and it's for the chip you are programming. You don't need to daisy chain anything together, either in hardware or in software. In Cerberus, the microSD card was a separate board. Here I integrated it because since I'm already doing everything SMD anyway, I integrated everything on the main board. This is the FTDI connector to program the flash memory of CAT, the Atmega microcontroller. And there is also this header here, the bootloader header, and that is for burning the bootloader into CAT. Even if you buy an Atmega already with a pre-burned bootloader, with Cerberus you have to burn it again because we have to change the fuses in order to use an external strong oscillator instead of a crystal or the internal oscillator. For the original Cerberus 2080, I did that in a separate breadboard. For this, I thought, it's SMB, people will not be able to play around with it in a breadboard. So I integrated this header here. I still have to test whether this is going to work, but I hope to be able to program the bootloader in system without having to take it to a separate circuit. And I put here on the silk screen the pinout for the bootloader header here. I couldn't put it next to it because it's a very congested area. It should be that because I want these traces to be as short as possible, so I put the silk screen farther up, but it should be clear enough what is what. That's a regulator. I'm suggesting now, as you can see here in the silk screen, I'm suggesting 12 volts instead of 9 because we don't know what people are going to hang from the expansion slots. There is 5 volts and there is ground, so you can power your boards meant for the expansion slots directly from Cerberus 2100. I added a little safety circuit here. That's a decoupling capacitor, and there is a little coil, a little inductor here also for decoupling. And I put a fuse, a recoverable fuse, meaning that it doesn't need to be replaced when it blows, because it doesn't blow, it stops conducting, but if you power the system down, it reconstitutes itself and conducts again. But I put it in here just in case somebody makes a mistake, puts a card in here that has a short circuit. I didn't want to screw the main system up. So the power that goes to the expansion cards is more or less isolated from the rest of the system via this little fuse. There is an ESD device here. It's a little transient voltage diode. So if for whatever reason your card starts injecting voltage into the system, the excess voltage can drain to ground via this device. So that's basically safety. The same buzzer as before, which works as the sound device. And the rest is mostly pull-ups. There are some 33 ohm resistors here and there to smoothen the clock signals. There are several clocks. There is a clock for each CPU. There is a clock for CAT, and there is the main clock that goes into spacer. And there is a clock that goes to the expansion as well. So they need to be conditioned. So there are some resistors for that, and everything else is basically bypass capacitors. And there are some larger decoupling capacitors of 100 micro, like C31 here, C30 over here, C32, C29, and C28, and here C2 is also a decoupling capacitor. And this is the main decoupling cap on the 12 volt line. That's a 470 microfarad low ESR capacitor. And there is a little diode here to prevent damage to the system. If you connect a barrel connector here in reversed polarity, this should be center positive, but if you mistake it, this diode here will prevent damage. There's some more ESD protection here and there. That's basically it. That's the system. Now, I'm not going to order these boards yet because the parts will only be available in April or May. But I wanted to share with you the idea, the looks of the system, and the protocol for the expansion card control, and ask for your feedback. Let me know in the comments below. If you don't mind, what you think of this protocol here. I tried to make it as simple and generic as possible to make it easy for anyone to build cards for this system and use it with their favorite CPU. If you have comments on this, suggestions, or if you think something is not optimal, please let me know in the comments below. That's the reason I'm making this video right now. It's to get your comments, because by March or early April, I will review this one more time just to make sure, and then I will order the parts and order the board and test the whole thing. But if you have feedback, I'd like to incorporate that feedback at that point already in late March. So that's why I'm putting out this video now. I hope you've enjoyed it. I look forward to hearing from you, and I will be back soon with the continuation of the Talus ES series. I didn't forget about it. It's just got to a point now where it's fairly easy, so I lost a little bit enthusiasm, but I'm going to make a final push now to finish it, and I think the final looks of the system will be a big surprise for you. I think it will be an amazing thing. My girlfriend is an artist, and she's giving me feedback on how the thing should look like, what it should look like when you put it all together, all the blinking lights and all that stuff. It will be quite something. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, take care, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.